Welcome back. This is Clue 6, the 6th lesson in our Kyoto Mystery quilt, and there's only 2 more after this, so we're almost done. Today we're going to be working with borders. We did work with borders somewhat in the earlier clues. So today we're going to be working with the wide stripe. There are 5 wide stripes across the border print, and you're going to be cutting from lengths of those, and it's important how you cut them out. So you're going to follow the directions exactly as your pattern says, but let me go over it with you. It tells you from 2 different stripes, so 2 of the 5 stripes, you're going to cut 76-inch pieces and set those aside. Those are for the top and bottom borders of the quilt. So that's from 2 different ones. You're going to have some leftover, and we'll be using that again in a second. And then take 2 different strips, and from those you're going to cut 2 pieces each, and those 2 pieces are going to each be 45 inches in length. Those are going to be set aside to the sides of the border. This quilt is rectangular, so it needs those. It's going to be spliced along the sides, and you'll see that as we get to the border section. Then from the remaining part, you're going to be cutting pieces for this month's clue. So we're going to be taking one of the leftover pieces that you had from cutting those borders and setting aside. Make sure you just put those away somewhere, the ones that you just cut. And we're going to talk about the mirror image motifs here. We have template A. You're going to make template A and template C. Now you'll see, you'll copy those from your pattern. It'll be in your printed downloads, or if you've purchased our pre-printed template film, you'll be able to cut those pieces out. One of the things that you don't really notice at first, but there's this little tiny skinny part that goes on the end of template C. And you're going to tape it down just the way we've taped other templates in the past. I would then cut this off 1/4 inch from the dot so that you don't have all that extra point hanging out over the edge. So you just 1/4 inch from the top of the dot. If you want to do it a little bit longer, as long as you mark your dots and know where you are on that, that's fine. So we're going to cut template A first because you can use some of the leftover from that for using template C. So the border print has 2 places where there are mirror image motifs. One of the places is along this mirror line right here. You see where this is the same reversed on either side of this line. The other space is over here, and you can see that you've got the mirror line running along that as well. So you can center this piece anywhere along this line. So template A, I can put it on this mirrored motif or this mirrored motif. It just depends on where you want to be. But for now, I'm going to put it on this one. And I always like a line from the border print to fall right along the line for sewing, which is that dotted line. So you'll see I haven't trimmed this down to the 1/4 inch on the side of the border. But I make sure it's exactly lined up. And then I'm going to mark some part of the design directly onto the template with my permanent marker here. Nice thing about our template film, you can even erase these permanent markers. So if you want to reuse it to cut these triangles from a different spot for another quilt or leftovers or whatever. But there I've got that lined up exactly. And then I will use the blue tailor's chalk. Will probably show up pretty well on this border. Now I've got that piece marked. I'm going to come down here, and I need to find the exact same spot. So I've got that little bit mark up there. So you'll cut 6 of these exactly the same, and then I'll cut them out. And I'm going to go ahead and cut these 2 pieces out just because I want you to see how we can use the leftovers. So while I cut this out, I'll be back in just a second. All right, so I've cut out 2 of these pieces, and here's my template. And I forgot to say, the way you get these marks off your template film is just to use a little bit of a little cotton or paper towel and a rubbing alcohol. But now we're ready to do template C. I need to put that little bit of tape on there to hold that point. We've done this before, so you don't need my instructions on how I'm going to do that. But in this case, I use both sides because I'm not going to be putting an iron to this, so it's not going to melt the tape. Okay, so that's template C. Now the thing about C, it will say on there, template C/CR. So instead of picking up a brand new stripe that you haven't cut into, or a piece of stripe that you haven't cut into, you can take advantage of these leftover pieces that are inside there, because I can put this down. Here again, I'm going to go all the way to the edge of the piece, and I can cut it anywhere along this edge that I want to. It doesn't really matter. Look here to see, I might like some of this teal part showing through on my piece. And I'm going to mark around this little piece here, a little scroll thing, and that'll be my guide for cutting more pieces out of it. And as I mentioned, I'm going to cut this off at about 1/4 inch so that we don't have that big long piece sticking out. You don't need to cut excess fabric that's just going to be cut off in the long run. So now I lost my place here, and line that up exactly. Make sure the dotted line, which is the sewing line, falls just outside that brown line. And then I can mark So now I can come down to this part and find that same little scrolly thing that I had and lay the template on. Now, do you see what I did? I picked it up and I flipped it upside down because that'll give me the reverse. So I've got the C and the C reverse. I can mark around that and I can cut it out. And I will get my various pieces that I need cut. I need 6 and 6 reverse out of template C, and I need 6 cut from template A. So I will show you how to sew those together in just a moment. So now we've got all the pieces cut for the border of the border piece, the C and C reverse, 6 of each. And we've got the A pieces. We'll get to those later. We'll touch on those in a minute. But it's important to get this lined up exactly on all the pieces, this border print that we cut. In order to do that, we need to mark the dots. You're going to need template C, of course, which is what we used for cutting our piece, but you're also going to need template F. Template F is the next template down. You'll see when I lay that on here, you can see how it exactly fits. So we're going to use template F to mark some of the dots. First of all, you mark the dots with using template C on the border print. So I'm going to lay this on here. I will use my mechanical chalk pencil to make the dots. All right, so I've got those dots marked, and they need to line up with the dots on template from template 6. I've already gone ahead and cut the holes. Let's turn this upside down so you can see where we're talking about. This is where the border print has to come, sort of like this. So I need a dot here. I'm going to lay this on top to get that dot. That tells me exactly where to stop my stitching. And then I need a dot down here to match up this. You see, these two pieces kind of overlap, become one long line that this border fits on. So that's why I'm using on 2 different pieces, marking those dots. Then I'm just going to line up this piece following the dots. Now you've got the dot on this side, I've got a dot on this side. Bring my pin out right at those dots. And I've got it all lined up exactly, so now I can take the pin. Now what I'm doing here when I'm pinning, I can feel the bulk of the seam, and my dot is right at that seam, so I'm going to put the pin in, go a little beyond the seam, and then snap it off, and it comes up right at the dot. That's how I make sure it's going to be right tight at that intersection. Then I'm going to come down here. I'll do the same thing, making sure the dots are lined up, and I'll put another pin. Now watch, I'm going to go in with the pin, beyond the seam line. I've got the seam line to my left. I'm going to bring it back until it kind of snaps off and comes up right at that dot. That's how I know to aim my stitching, and it's going to come out right at the right place. Now I just put another pin in the middle, and then when I sew, I'm actually going to, I'm not going to sew this because you've seen me sew, but I'm going to show you how I would start it. I don't want to start from the top. I want to get this piece and this piece joined together. I know I've got it lined up properly, so I'm going to remove the pin and push my thumbnail against that seam. I'm going to come over here on the back side, put my needle in right at the dot, and it comes up right there. And then to start the sewing, I'll push my needle against that dot, go down, pivot, and continue my sewing down this side. So that's how I would do it by hand. Now let me show you, those of you, I don't know if most of you did it by hand or by machine with foundations, whichever way you chose, it's perfectly fine. Your pattern instructions tell you sort of the standard way of doing foundations when you're joining a piece like this on here, how you'd lay it down and you'd baste it and you have the basting stitch. Now let me get one over here that has the paper on it. I find it, the problem is, what I'm really concerned about is sewing along this line. When we did the folding of the paper, when we had our foundations and you were doing it, you folded that paper right along your cardboard piece or along that line. You laid it back using the add a quarter ruler. You butted it up next to there and you cut the piece. So we already have exactly 1/4 inch on there. I just find it easier, don't worry about this, how it's going to look on the back, because when I did them, as long as this was cut exactly the 1/4 inch, I should be sewing very much, very, very close to being on that line. So I'm just going to lay this down on top. Again, I would make sure it matches with my, I would have a dot here. I'm not going to take the time to mark those, but they would have the 2 dots. And you're going to line them up with the dots on the other side, but you're going to say, well, wait, there's no dot on the foundation. But if we look at the foundation, the dot is right here. Where these points come together, that would be where that dot is going to be. And the same thing down here, where this meets this seam line, that's going to be the dot. We just don't have the dot showing up, but those would be where the 2 dots are on the foundation. So all you have to do is make sure to line up this piece with those dots. One down there. I mean, I'm not going to take the time lining it up, but it's basically right there and there. You can double check with your dot on the back side. And then I'd pin this in place. And this time is different. All the other foundations, when you've been sewing it from the back. You don't want to sew it from the back this time because you might not be exactly on the line of the border print. That's the important thing. So this is the one time on this foundation that you're going to sew from the top and just sew along that line and you're good to go. Here would be another one. I don't have a finished one here. I have a finished one with the hand sewing. So for this part of the clue, all you need to do is sew that border print piece C to each of the foundations. Just make sure you get the reverse and the non-reversed correct, and you sew that on. Then we have another part where we cut out those 6 template A pieces, and we're going to move on to that. I'll be right back. Okay, so now we're to the second half of the clue for today. You cut 6 of these little triangles from triangle A, and now we're going to sew those onto these points that we have here. They're going to go on the bottom of the point. Very simple. You only have 6 of them to sew on there, so it's not a lot of work this time. It's just the main part of the clue, and what you're aiming for is the accuracy of getting these border prints all in the right place. So here again, we want to mark the dots where the intersections would cross. You can actually use the perfect piecer. You can once again make holes in the template with your hole punch, or you can use the perfect piecer. This is a 60-degree angle, so you just line the angle up there You can go through and make your dot. You can kind of see that little dot there. Then I'll come over here, line up that angle, make the dot. And that dot needs to come right at the edge of that seam. So I'm going to do that little thing I showed you before. I'm going to line the dot up right at the edge of the seam. I'm going to take a pin. I'm going to go in there, pull it back till it kind of snaps off that seam. Then I'm going to pin it again. And then I'm just going to sew across there. So once again, let me show you how I start the seam, because I want it very tight where that seam is. So I'm going to come over here to the other side. I'm going to start where the dot would be on that other side. Pull it up. Now every time I come up, I do a back stitch. That helps to reinforce the seam, makes it nice and strong. I take a little back stitch, go back down again, and continue on across. Because I do this little gathering motion, I like to smooth it out, do a little back stitch, continue on. I want to stop right at that dot. I'm going to pull out the pin because it doesn't need to hold it in place any longer. I'm going to pull that out, do a little back stitch, pull it back. You can see it snap off that edge of that seam. And then for my knot, which I've shown you before, but I'll do it again, I pull through till I have just that little loop, then I come behind the loop, which gives it an extra little twist. Then just tie that off. So we have 6 of those to do. You can see how long it took me to do hand stitching, so I've already got one done. Not that long. You would press that, put it in place, and we're ready to move on to clue 7 next time. And I've got a lot of surprises for you then. It's going to be fun. I think you'll have a really good time. See you then.